Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of History's Benchwarmers. We are here with Dr. Koeller. He is both me and Richard's history professor here at North Park University, and advisor too, I think. I believe I'm not...
You have advised me.
Yes, I know I'm yours. I'm not sure that I'm still...
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
I don't have an advisor anymore. It's student teaching, so they're just like, yeah, go do whatever.
So yeah, Dr. Koeller, if you want to just say a little bit about yourself, and...
I'm a history professor, study modern Europe. I've been at North Park for 25 years. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So then my first question to you is, how has technology helped you in grading, for example? Because I can imagine if you want 15 pages of a paper, people giving you 15 actual sheets of paper, and if you have 50 kids, 60 kids, or students, that's a lot of papers to go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the first technology assignments that I did was something called WebCron. It's still up. It has been stolen from me, but it's still up. It's a series of history chronologies, and I put them up so that they're kind of embedded. So you have the one chronology is European history, ancient, medieval, modern, and then you go to an ancient chronology, and then it gives you pre-Greek, Roman, Byzantine history, and all of these are hyperlinked. Now, when I started that, I had to do that in raw HTML. This is before even Netscape Gold. For those of you who are old enough to remember Netscape Gold,
I think I remember something. Or my dad talking about it.
Yeah, yeah. I started with raw HTML. I had to, and I was actually teaching my students raw HTML, because the idea was then they wrote a page describing one of the events on the chronology.
Oh, okay.
And then I would link them so that you had this kind of history encyclopedia connected by chronologies.
That's really cool.
It is. It was really very cool.
Why did you stop?
Well, there were two things. One was North Park University. One of my students wrote a page on the Armenian genocide, and naturally the Turkish people saw this thing on the web, and they started to complain. In fact, I got letters from the Turkish consulate about this.
God.
And so basically the media people at North Park told me to take it down. I was censored.
Wow.
Wow.
Because of this Armenian genocide thing.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
That's...
They would not, I'm sorry, this is one of my beefs with North Park, is that they would not stand up and defend the Armenian genocide. I don't...
Wow, that's...
Well, it is a controversial issue.
It is a controversial issue.
But
a university should stand by its students and its faculty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the basics of academic freedom. But it was too damaging to the image of North Park to have this thing up, so they decided to force me to take it down.
Wow.
Politics are in everything.
Yeah. And so what happened was that I then took it private and put it up on a GoDaddy site. But then foolishly, I took it down, but everything on the web is always still on the web, and somebody simply copied and pasted it, bought the domain when I stopped paying for the domain. They bought it and put the files back up and put ads on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they're making money off of what me and 10 years worth of students have done.
Wow. That's terrible.
The thing
Wow.
is, and it's one of these things that I can't really trace where it's from. Who's doing it?
Is there, obviously there's no copyright information on the
Oh,
on your work?
Oh, that's the horrible thing, is he left the copyright notice. I mean, it's clearly my copyright.
Right.
So then can't you go in and talk to somebody? Like,
no, that's the thing. There is no oversight.
huh.
Oh shit.
Wow.
Wow.
That's crazy.
It is.
So with that, how long ago was this?
Let's see. I stopped putting new pages in around 2004. I kept it up for about 5 years after that, paying stuff myself. And then this guy robbed it maybe about 5 years ago.
Wow. Have you thought about doing something like that again?
Not really. And the reason is that it has to do with the technology. You want to talk about technology. When I was doing it, I was doing what is called a static page. You format it and it stays in a particular format.
Mm-hmm.
What we use now are dynamic pages.
Yeah.
So the page changes each time you load it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm afraid that I don't have the skills to put together, this to relearn all of this stuff. I've got other things that I'd rather be doing than.
I read that in an article that historians nowadays, I said that really weird. I was going to say history majors, but historians nowadays have to start learning other things other than history. Like, yes, we are good writers. We are good for finding information. We're great at all that. But, things like HTML and learning how to use technology and incorporating that with history is something that is starting to become up and coming, I guess, within the history world.
Well, I'll ask you two. Did either of you use a spreadsheet when you were taking the notes for your papers?
A spreadsheet? No.
No.
How did you take your notes?
I would look through. If I found a quote that I wanted, I would put the little on a sticky note or whatever, just like what page it was on, like where I find it, and more like hand, more like things to do with my hands.
So you weren't using technology.
I feel like it's.
But what I'm saying is that if I had been thinking ahead, I have read hundreds of books, and if I had taken decent notes over these 30 years, I would have had such a bibliography and such a storehouse of notes, and I could. And the thing is, it would all be indexed, and I could search it, but I don't. So I think you're right. As far as there are programs that will help you take your citations and your notes, and I think those should be more widely known. We should be teaching that stuff to our history majors, like Nota Bene or.
I didn't learn any of that stuff till last year.
Really?
Yeah, even having a couple classes here, I would hear Dr. Raby say it, but I didn't know what it meant until I sat down and asked her what it meant, and Ibid, and I don't know if I pronounced that right, but
Ibid,
I didn't know about those things until just last year, and now I'm starting to try to use them. But it's crazy what those are things that should be taught in high school.
Yes,
those are skills that should be taught in high school. Within our content class that we have tonight. The professor is a faculty member. He's the department chair for Niles North, I believe.
Yeah, Niles North.
And he says that history was losing ground and it was starting to be merged with English, and history was at a risk of not being history anymore. But now he said it's up and coming again because people are pushing skills over content now.
Yeah.
And the book that we had to read, and which I already read, the Lies My Teacher Told Me, he discusses that skills over content issue in there. So it's something to think about, because historically, historians are supposed to do research, but that's not what's being taught anymore. And in the book, he mentions math professors don't have to worry about advanced topics in calculus being mistaught, because that's not something that they're taught. They're taught primary skills to get them higher and higher at their levels. Why isn't that the same approach with history? Why is it that, we just expect our students to memorize dates and content, and, a week later expect them to memorize more date and more content, and to expect them to learn history in that way is kind of obsolete now.
Yeah. I really think of history, that a lot of people say that. That it's just names, dates, places. That's why when I say, oh, I'm a history major, oh, I hate history. It breaks my heart when I hear people say that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But to them, it is like that. But the more, especially during the semester in capstone, I realize that history is more of kind of like a discussion. Like that's the point of it, to kind of discuss what's going on and why things are happening and how that can change and how we can do things differently and be different. That's what really the discussion of history is for. Kind of like philosophy, almost, in a sense. Mm-hmm. Maybe I take more of a philosophical stance on history. But that's just how I think it should be. Like, especially when we teach it to kids in high school, this should be something that's like opening up their mind to like discussion, like creating your own opinion. I know that's a standard, I think, for...
It is.
But to actually have students... History is a great example because, there's so many different perspectives people take on it. Like you were talking about with Nicaragua, how, certain people say that the dictator was good and the son was bad, or that they were all bad. Like, just, it depends on the perspective. And for you to sit down as a historian, or even as people talking about history, to really, have those discussions about what really happened should open your mind about how different we are as, like, humans, how we act and how we do things. It's very unique. And how we work together with each other, and how we don't work together with each other. Yeah. But that's how I feel it should be discussed. So yes, skills, but also content too.
Well, in my undergrad, my GE classes now, I've gone basically to simply teaching students how to read. I assign monographs, and the idea is to help them understand that what they need to find is not the names and dates and places, it's the thesis. Mm-hmm. And see how the author constructs the argument, and then decide whether you think the author has proven the thesis or not. And, that sounds elementary, but, most kids stop doing having any kind of reading instruction in like 5th grade.
That's very true.
And almost all of that comes from English teachers who are teaching how to read nonfiction. So most kids never get any kind of instruction in how to read nonfiction.
That makes me think about Gabby. She took one of your courses, and a History of Money course she took with you. And she told me that she remembers the way you taught her to read was to read the first 3 pages, the middle 3 pages, and the last 3 pages. Because with that, you'll be able to get exactly what you're looking for, the thesis, the argument, the conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And that way. It blew my mind, but last semester when we were having class in here, that's how I led class discussion, was the first 3, middle 3, last 3. And it really does work pretty well.
I mean, chapter.
Yeah.
I do that. I took... I had a class in which we simply went through a chapter of a book. And I said, look, this is structured so that the first page and a half is the introduction. Here's the thesis statement. Now, everything else in this chapter, until you get to the last page and a half, is evidence. If you're interested in the evidence, read it. Mm-hmm. If you don't care about the evidence, you've got the thesis, and that's what you're there to understand. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say that the evidence is unimportant, but we've placed such emphasis on the idea of doing history is memorizing data, that the most important thing that you should get out of a history class is that the French Revolution began in 1789, and the American Revolution began in 1776. Those are the important things that you should get out of studying history. And it isn't. It's, as you said, it's an argument. But you have to, it's an argument, it's a discussion. And that means that knowing what you're arguing about is more important. It's the important thing.
Yeah. Because we have that argument of skills over content, that they want these students. We want students to understand like the skills that come out of learning from history instead of like history itself. But for me personally, like just learning about history, like it's nuts. It's insane. It's, you know, almost like a story, but it's
it's a very complex story.
Yes.
Well, to me, what we learned this semester is not history to the sense of how we traditionally learn it, but I think it's metacognitive history. It's thinking how historians think.
Yep.
And I loved it. I loved that course, and I just think that if we taught students that way, I think we would have better historians today. And history would be just as important as math or as English or any other subject you could think of, because those are life skills.
Well, not only that, but, you know, we live in a country in which history really is undervalued to our detriment. I mean, when you think of, you know, Ben is doing his paper on the beginnings of the Vietnam War. Now, come on. How many people in the government of the United States knew the history of Vietnam and were consulted about that decision? Or for the Iraq War, for that matter. If you would have had just one person in that conference room who knew something about Arab or Iraqi history, they would have raised a red flag immediately.
Well, even if it was a cultural person too,
Yeah,
not
sure.
a sociologist,
Sure.
not just a historian, but anybody who knows that type of, you know, lifestyle. As an advisor is probably going to be an important person, because you have to know thy enemy.
Sure. That's one of Sun Tzu's
Yeah.
first laws.
Exactly. So, and that could be
the idea that we were going to be greeted as liberators is supposed to laugh.
Yeah.
Do you think we still have that idea of like Orientalism, for example, not just in the study of these, but just people in general, that we claim to be experts just because, you know, we know a little bit about it compared to living in it and being within a society to really understand it? That makes sense.
Yeah, I think the Orientalism problem is still with us, but
I would agree with that.
I think though that more people are aware of the problem. On the other hand, I think that Said sets too high a bar. I mean, I'm very much of the school that says that, you know, historical understanding is rooted in empathy, you know, or sympathy, you know, fellow feeling. You know, you put yourself in the other person's shoes,
Sure.
and I understand that can't be done perfectly. And I think Said tends to say, you know, unless you can do it perfectly, you shouldn't do it at all. And I think that sets too high a barrier that we can have empathy with other people to the extent that we need in order to understand how they behave.
So do you think that Said, his intent may have been more so to really open people's eyes, and, you know, because he even stated that he thinks that Westerners look at the East or the Oriental as, you know, something they can make money off of. And maybe it's that approach that he needs to take a more of an extreme level to open people's eyes and get them to actually think about what he's saying.
Oh, I think that's true. I think he was writing a polemic.
Mm-hmm.
I think his basic argument is right. You know, that you know, our study of the East came from the perspective that the West was superior, and that we did not give proper respect to the cultural achievements of people in the East. I think that he's absolutely right on that. But to go the step further and to say that, you know, the West can't write about the East, I think goes too far.
Okay.
Because then, you know, that starts then to get at what I think is, you know, fundamental for society, is this idea that you have to have, you know, some kind of sympathetic understanding for other people. And if all I can have is sympathetic understanding for people who are just like me. That kind of makes society as a whole problematic.
Yeah.
So then, what do you think we should do about that?
Oh, I think, we just have to be more self-aware, more self-reflective, but then also, use good methodology and be sympathetic to the people that you're writing about.
That's difficult in this day and age with
Of course,
technology.
it's very
Sympathy is like on the down because of technology. I can send him a text message, it'd be as hurtful as I want, and not have to worry about how he feels because I'm not going to see it.
Yeah. No, and not only that, but you can send it anonymously.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
So then, I guess, as a society, do you think it's just too controversial for us to really come to that conclusion? Because, we can become as aware as we want about it, but it's doing something that'll make the difference. You know what I mean?
I'm not quite sure what you...
Not for a second.
Can you rephrase the question,
Can I rephrase
please?
the question? Lost my train of thought. But
I guess with my thought, I was thinking, along Saeed's approach, how would he view, somebody from the United States going to Germany to study, what was going on during that time, going back and forth from East and West Berlin? How would that look in his eyes? Because it is two Western cultures, but
you're talking to a guy who actually did that.
Exactly. But these are the questions I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, that's, my ancestry is German.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm fourth generation. So what real Germanness do I have in my outlook? So if we're going to play that kind of game, what right do I have to write German history? It's not because I have German roots, because they're not really. I mean, other couple of last names is what I have, but it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
To say only X kind of people can write X history.
So then my question is to you, Professor, is what really drove you to do, besides family, ties, what really drove you to your fascination with Germany?
Twofold. My undergraduate degree is in philosophy.
Okay.
And I have a minor in music.
Oh.
And so...
So you read another language?
Yes.
Because music is a language.
Yes, I can read music.
Instruments or singing?
Actually, my area was theory and composition.
Oh, okay.
But I played piano. I took saxophone. I did sing in choirs, but I just wasn't very good. Let's just be honest. I enjoyed studying it. I learned. I liked analyzing it and learning about it. But as a performer, I just never could do it. Partly stage fright. I just cannot play in public.
But can you give a speech in public?
Oh yeah.
So then what's the difference?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the difference is, but no, I have no trouble speaking in public.
I have a difficulty presenting sometimes. I get very nervous. But if I'm teaching, it's a whole different story. Like, I can get up there, it's like, I can give a great act, I guess.
Yeah.
And not that I'm acting as a teacher, but as a teacher, you do have to put up a certain act. And I feel like I could do that well. But when I go to lead class discussion, even if I have questions written down, it's like my mind starts moving at 1,000 miles per hour. And I don't know if it's because, these are all my peers who are all just reading the same thing, who are all learning the same thing. I just don't know what it is.
Could be that power dynamic.
Yeah, it could be.
It could be.
But anyway, German history allows me to do both study music and philosophy.
Shit. Really?
Yeah. I don't know whether you knew this, but for many years I taught the world music course here.
Did not know
I
that.
didn't know we had a world music course.
Yeah, we have a world music course that's part of the GE program. For a number of years, it was team taught. I taught the history part, and we had a musician who taught the music part. But then he moved, and I took over and taught the class for a number of years.
Wow. And how was that?
Oh, it's a blast. I mean, look, you notice over there, I have my instrument collection.
Oh.
I don't have my nose flute there, but
Nose
that's
flute?
at home. Yeah, Hawaiian nose flute.
Interesting. How does, like, you just play it from here?
You play it, you blow through your nose. Hawaiians, the idea is that if you use your mouth, you can lie. But if you go through your nose, you can't lie. So this is the way you get a pure tone and a pure...
I was just going to say that, yeah.
Wow. That's it. Wow, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
That's crazy how different cultures have different ways of
It really
expressing themselves, especially through music,
Yeah.
you know? So then...
How much of it is history versus anthropology at that point, though?
Yeah, a lot of it is winds up being anthropology.
I wish we had anthropology classes here.
Oh, I do too.
We should definitely do that. Or aren't we like the school in the city, right?
Yeah.
How they described it. But they always, I remember last year, they were really big on diversity. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
They were just all the time diversity this, diversity that. Even the buses when I was driving downtown at North Park and was talking about how diverse it is.
Mm-hmm.
We should have an anthropology department, or at least someone to teach it. If we're so diverse, we have to understand that there's different neighborhoods within Chicago.
Yeah.
Everyone, I mean, yes, we're all American, but there's like the different cultures within
Sure.
there. People coming from all over the world coming and living in Chicago. Like, to understand how those communities are built. Like, I went to Chinatown in the summer. Never been there before in my life.
Oh,
Really?
It's so different,
It was,
right?
yes, it was insane. I loved it. It was great. I got to see that big little arch right there.
I had a friend in high school. Pretty sure her dad was in the Chinese mafia because she said her dad owned every restaurant and store on that block.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm just like, he owns every single one of them? Yeah. Oh, okay. And she's like, let's go eat somewhere. I'm like, I don't know if I want to.
Well, in my history of food class, one of the projects that they do is a documentary of a Chicago neighborhood.
Okay.
Oh, that's cool.
You know, something that I was doing research on Greektown because in my ESL class, that was one of the projects we had to do, make a presentation and write a paper about a certain immigrant group within Chicago. Do you remember doing that?
I do.
Yeah.
I presented on Little Italy,
Did
which
you?
is non-existent
Not
anymore.
anymore, yeah. There's some remnants.
There's.
Yeah, that's what I did mine in Greektown too. And I worked with Greeks over at this Greek place over in Glenview, right on Milwaukee and Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, hey, what do you guys think about Greektown? They're like, what? Like, Greektown's not Greektown anymore. It's just restaurants. It's not what it used to be.
Yeah.
You know, now it's more of just corporation, people to get money from there.
Yeah.
That's all that it is. So I feel like, because with Little Italy, it's not Little Italy anymore. Greektown's not Greektown anymore.
It's all University Village now, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it that these, people that are, that have moved out from that area would look back at it and say, like, that's not really how it is? Or...
Oh, with Little Italy, they were forced out.
Mm-hmm.
When Daly Sr. decided to expand UIC.
Did not know that. Now I know that.
Yeah.
But
No, it was intentional to break up the Italian neighborhood.
it's insane that we can...
Does the mafia have anything to do with that?
No, I think it was just that they weren't supporting him.
And so when did that happen?
Oh, Daly. You thug.
When did that happen?
I don't recall, but it's been
Well, he
a
was
while.
a mayor in the 70s and
Yeah.
80s, right?
Yeah.
Not the 80s.
No, not in the 80s.
Yeah, 70s.
So
Where he ruled Chicago with an iron fist. With the iron factories down in southeast side of Chicago.
So, were you here, Professor, when all that was going on? Like all this just in the 70s and 80s?
No, I moved to Chicago in 93.
93?
Although my family is here, so we'd come visit my grandparents periodically.
So why did you decide to move to Chicago and not stay in New York?
I went to graduate school. I grew up in upstate New York, moved to California for graduate school. I was in California for about 15 years. Then my first full-time teaching job was in Oklahoma, in a little town called Enid,
Yeah.
55,000 people. I moved there in August, and by November I was already looking for other work.
Wow.
the North Park job happened to open up. And since I'm a member of the Covenant, it was a good fit.
Oh, that works.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So how that connection
Yeah.
can get you here. Wow. I've always been, I was a little skeptical when I was applying for North Park, when it's like, what are you? And they asked what religious denomination are you? I was like, I thought this was, I didn't realize that it was a Christian school at the time.
Yeah.
But it was after the fact that I realized that. No wonder my mother liked it so much. She was like, you gotta go here. And I was like, okay. Until I realized that. But so then how were the first couple of years here at North Park? How was Chicago when you first, like in the 90s?
Chicago in the 90s. I think crime there was much more fear of crime, at least on the north side. I think I saw many bars on windows that you just don't see around here now.
Well, from when I've been here, I moved here about 5 years ago, or started coming around 5 years ago. And from what I've seen with Albany Park, 5 years ago to today, people are more comfortable than they were even 5 years ago.
Oh, yes.
And rent has gone up tremendously.
Yes. Well, this area is gentrifying now.
Yes.
Which is insane.
Yes.
I think that they just, the government could just carve up places like that. You know, it's just, it's insane. I know I should probably not whisper that, but it's insane, you know, to think about, you know, just what needs to be, you know, what the government can do, what they're doing, you know. So,
why a college professor? Why not high school or just out of curiosity? Because I guess I have aspirations of my own. You know, maybe being a college professor is, you know, a thought I've had too. Just because I do like the higher level thinking from students.
I think that's part of it. I had such a miserable time in high school. I didn't know. No way I was going back there.
that's true.
I had a great high school experience.
Really?
To the point where my high school, I went there to observe there, and if I can go work there, I'll be okay with that. But the pay is significantly less because they are a Catholic school.
Yeah.
So.
Gotta weigh the odds.
Yeah. My one of my old teachers from there, who I keep in contact with, he told me that if he were to leave De La Salle, because he has 2 masters and he's going for his PhD now.
Uh-huh.
And he said if he were to leave to go to a public school to teach, first off, they probably wouldn't take him. And if they did take him, he'd probably be too expensive for their budget. Just because he has the degrees behind him, he's got the experience teaching. I think he's been teaching for over 11 years, and you know, he's a smart guy, and he's young too. I think he's like 35.
Wow.
And he just said if I were to leave here, I would be very unhappy. He said teaching at a Catholic school is giving me the freedom to teach what I want to teach, not be restricted to the standards that Illinois has. So
with that, how do you feel about, you know, teaching or being a professor, like in history, kind of like, you know?
And how has it changed in the past, like, 10 years? And that's kind of a big...
Well, can we give you a sense of how North Park has changed?
Okay.
When I started in 93, we had a course called Traditions of the West. It was a two-semester Western Civ survey course. Both halves were required of every student. And I taught both halves. It was a team-taught course, but I was a professor in both halves, which means that I taught 2 classes to every student on campus.
It must have been a small campus at the time.
That's right. We had a very small.
Because if not, you'd be teaching thousands of students right now.
Exactly. Now I teach, 4, surveys to around, 35, cap of 35, so 140 students. Whereas I was teaching, this large lecture of, maybe 200.
Wow,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Holy shit! How was that? Did you like lecturing? Or do you like this more?
Oh, I think I have come to the conclusion that lecturing is a horrible method of teaching. I just don't like it at all. I try to avoid it as much as possible.
Yeah, I have a joke here that our education professors lecture us on not lecturing to our students. So
I do like a seminar type of way.
I do.
I really like that concept because, like I mentioned earlier, with how I want history to, like how I want to teach history and how I think history is, and how I want to teach it to students, that would be the best way, for them, like to discuss it, to get down to the nitty gritty about it. That's what I feel is most important.
And when it comes to the GE classes, I kind of think that Becker has it right in his, every man his own historian, that most people pick and choose what they want to learn from a history class. Mm-hmm. And they kind of put together their own narrative. And so I feel it's my job more to provide them with important but interesting information that they will voluntarily learn on their own, rather than to give them what they need to know and force it down their throat.
Be the facilitator of learning.
Exactly.
That's kind of where I want to be as a teacher too. But it's very difficult to try to do that with 13, 14-year-old kids, because you give them any type of freedom, you give them an inch, they'll try to take a mile. And that's where, for me, were my thoughts of, do I really want to be a high school or middle school teacher long term? Probably not. Just because I do like the higher level of thinking, the metacognitive thinking from other people around me, I enjoy. Like I've told you last semester, I told you this semester, sometimes I don't participate because I'm soaking everything in because I love what I'm hearing. Then I'll add my piece, but I just love hearing the conversation and how people think. I do enjoy that.
Yeah, I like that. That's kind of why I want to be a professor instead of a teacher, because I do like that higher end thinking, where you can have arguments, where you can actually discuss things, instead of like having to, you got to get this skill down, you got to make sure you got to get this and get this and get this. And college, I feel like it's more loose in the sense of what you can do with your students.
How are you restricted to teach, or are you just given freedom to teach as you like?
I think most of the restrictions on what I teach are more informal than formal. There are some certain subjects that just don't talk about because this is a Christian.
Such as
one level. Okay, just on a basic level. I teach this history of food course. Well, one very important food is alcohol. But I'm not going to bring in alcohol to talk about.
Well, yeah.
History of mixed drinks. That's not going to happen here.
That makes me think of, I can't remember what it's called, but it was like the place to be in ancient Greek, where people would go to fields, either drink some type of drink that was made from like fermented wheat, and get super blasted out of their mind. I don't remember what it's called, but I never heard about it.
The cult of Dionysus?
It's part of the cult of Dionysus, but it was a one-time a year event.
Yeah.
And if you went one time, you weren't allowed to go again. But you weren't allowed to talk about what happened there either. And I was listening to a lecture. I don't remember who from. I don't remember his name. I'll have to search his name in a second. But he was talking about this time period where people would go and, nowadays we have like LSD and other type of psychedelic drugs, but people would go to this thing, and he was claiming that it was a psychedelic event that was happening as like a spiritual event that was happening, and I can't
associated it with alcohol rather than psychedelics.
But that's what there are people in Greece who are trying to figure out what it was, whether it was mushrooms, whether it was some type of fermented alcohol, whatever it was, they were trying to figure it out, and they can't figure it out. And I'll have to search. Oh, Terence McKenna.
Terence McKenna.
Terence McKenna. I was listening to him, and he was talking about it, and I wish I can remember the name, but I was so fascinated, and I thought.
The Bacchanal?
I think that's what it be. When I was listening to it, and I was just like, these are things I would have liked to learn in school, even in college. These are things that I'm not taught.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to think that this guy who's just super into psychedelics, super smart guy though, he brings up this information that I think is pretty significant to understanding somebody's culture.
So when you went to Germany, what year was that? When the years ago? So
86, 87.
86, 87, okay.
Didn't the wall come down in 87?
89.
89, okay.
I left the day after Reagan did his Mr. Gorbachev tear this wall down speech.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
How was Germany at that time after that speech? Did it impact anything, or?
I was there for only one day after that speech.
Oh.
So
one thing for me, I don't think I've ever learned history past World War II. Anything, I mean, I've read about Vietnam and the Korean War and, within whatever textbooks show you, but after that, I didn't learn anything. And for me, hearing about Ronald Reagan and learning about these things now that I'm researching myself, it's just like, there's so much significant history, which is so modern, that our people have lived through, that is untouched, at least in schools.
Yeah.
And it's mind-blowing to me, and it's frustrating to me because, I don't know how imperative it is that I learn, how things were, during the Dark Ages to what it is now. I mean, I understand that there are things to understand, levels of getting to somewhere, steps that we took as human beings, but, these things are a little more significant today because things that happened in the 70s still affect today's world.
That's insane. Well, I think, as a world perspective, in America, we are more focused on the things that are happened, like the civil rights movement and the hippie movement, and then we're more focused on things internally in what was going on during the end of World War II to basically the end of communism or when the wall came down. But I would definitely like to see what the shape of Europe was after. We don't talk about it a lot in America, but I feel like it's on a world stage view, Europe is literally coming out limping out of World War II.
Well, yeah,
what I mean?
We come back to the United States and it's like, prosper, but we don't. But it's not talked about how Europe was affected, how other countries like France and Italy and Germany, how all these countries were affected, and
just the history of the EU, we don't talk about.
Yeah.
Or the history of NATO, for that matter.
I still don't understand that NATO. It's like they have power, but not really. They can't really do much. I don't know how it works. I really don't.
I think their power just falls in line that nothing gets done. True. And then if they want to get something done, the United States just leads the charge.
The only time I ever heard of significant, UN involvement was during Rwanda. Right?
Well, there's NATO forces in Africa right now. And I have a friend who came to North Park who fought in Africa.
Oh, wow.
And he does not talk about his wartime at all. At all. I mean, I'm pretty sure that he was going through some PTSD while he was here. Because whenever he would come to my house, he would get pitch black drunk to go to sleep.
Really?
And he could not sleep unless he was drunk.
Wow.
And there was one night he started drinking, and we were in my house. It's a unincorporated Cook County, so we have nice forested area. We can have just giant bonfires, and nobody's going to say anything. We were having a little bonfire, and he's drinking, and he starts crying. He said, "I'm so sorry for everything I've done." I'm like, "What have you done?" And he just burst into tears and starts going on and telling me his war stories. I'm just like, wow, you have a lot on your shoulders. And he converted to Islam while he was in Africa.
Oh.
And he is so frustrated with the United States.
I can believe it.
And it's unimaginable to see. My older brother fought in Afghanistan. He fought in Afghanistan. He went to... he was on a boat going around the Pacific Islands. He was in Okinawa for a while. And he was in Australia. When the Marine Corps started first training with Australia, the new battalion, he was there training with them. He was the first. And he doesn't have any type of PTSD at all from when he was in Afghanistan. He said the first day he was there, his friend was blown up by an RPG right next to him. And he said he saw the shards of shrapnel flowing past his eye like it was slow motion.
Wow.
And it's how are you not affected?
war, and depending on where you fight it, like that plays a big role. I mean, in Africa, I feel like it's no hold bars down there. I mean, anything and everything goes.
I don't know if I believe that, though. I think, just like Orientalism, they paint Africa to be a picture of what it actually isn't.
Mm.
You know, we see the pictures of starving kids in Africa, but there are civilizations that are thriving in Africa. They are going, I mean, thriving within their own right. You know, they're not Western society, like Chicago thriving, but they're thriving within their own right.
But it's like, I would argue with that because the way that Europe carved up Africa, it's just unbelievable.
No, yeah, I'm not saying that Africa's
like
not poor or
right, but like in the understanding of the West, they are civilized. The whole goal was to make them look like us, and that's what we did. And now we have a bunch of different tribal people living together who never did that before. And all these different tribes are now consolidated. Like, you guys are Nigerian. You guys are Ugandan. Like, no, we're this, and you just labeled us as that. And it's a mess of things because the wealthy people, which was always the common.
Isn't that what the issue is in South Africa right now?
That's the issue everywhere.
But
that's
no,
not Western.
There are big riots going on because of issues like that.
Yeah, and it's just that's what I mean. Like, there is like cities, yes, but it's in a Western view. It's not their style, like how they would have done it. Like, it's very complicated mixing all these people together. You know, when I was doing my research on the Franks, I mean, the amount of barbarian tribes that were in Gaul alone, not even talking about the German ones that stayed and didn't come over, you know, it's just the amount of them was ridiculous. And you can't look at them as a whole. You have to look at them as like an individual. Like, and then I tried writing about like the Germanic tribes as a whole. You can't do that because they're all unique. I mean, yes, they have the same traditions and language, but the culture and the way that they look, it's very different in how they did things. So that's the same way I feel with Africa. But it's just, since, you know, barbarians were in Europe, it's better understanding because that's where they came from compared to understanding something that's completely different, like in Africa, which they, you know, and now it's like, well, we don't get what you're doing, so we're just going to impose what we already have to make it better for our understanding. You know, that's how I feel.
But there are cultures that are thriving in Africa, though. And, you know, like you said, that there's a view that Africa is just this dumping ground, and this hole is not true. You know, Africa, yes, there are starving children, there are starving people, but it's not just that. It's not what Africa is. There's so much more to Africa that I never cared to learn for until I'm starting to do research into it, too, because there's so much more than what meets the eye. And what we see on the news is just a picture that's being painted. It's not the whole truth.
Yeah, of course.
And that's what Gabby's grandma was saying, too, about Somoza and Ortega right now, that there's a picture being painted, and that's not the entire truth of what it is in this country. So,
and it's our job as historians to find out that truth. Damn it. That's our job. That's what we gotta do. But, you know, I don't know, man. Just, that's why I told Professor Koeller that I'm in love with Europe, because it's just, it's so complex, and this complex nature, it just, to now, we have this Western idea of doing things, and we're spreading it all over and making all these countries that would normally not do this become more Western. And we're making everybody, you know, everybody just to be the same. And it's not, I don't think it's good, because, I mean, yes, you have a common government, but what you have to do to get that government, what you have to do to the people for them to, you know, be okay with it.
So isn't that what Occidentalism is, then?
What's that?
Well, it's like the Western, where Oriental is the East, Occidental is the West.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that be what it is, trying to impose the Occident to the Orient and trying to impose your lifestyle onto them? Or am I wrong there?
Well, some of it, of course, is voluntary, because the West has set the economic game. And if you want to play the economic game, you have to play by Western rules.
Right. Money makes the world go round.
Of course.
So then, what are you? I know you teach the history of money class.
Yeah.
So how does that play a role in your, like, the way that you would teach it?
Well, the thing that I want students to get out of that class is the idea that we in the United States are very, very much this idea that an economy is something that's natural. You know, it's just something that, you know, capitalism is just the norm. It's what an economy always has been. It's, you know, it's the way it's always supposed to be. And I want to problematize that by showing that no, the economic system that we have has grown. It has been shaped by people making deliberate decisions. You know, the idea that somehow a corporation, a limited liability corporation, is natural is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But yet, most people seem to think, you know, okay, we've got corporations, and that's just part of being an economy. No. And this then gets into the whole issue of, you know, problematizing the idea of the role of government in the economy. Because, you know, we have a lot of people who think that, you know, in order for the market to work properly, you have to get the government out of it. But sorry, you don't have corporations if you don't have a government to establish the rules for what a corporation is. What does it mean to be incorporated? That requires somebody to establish the rules of incorporation. Even something as simple as a trade. How do you know when you have in fact made a trade? What are the signs that say that you have agreed to give up your control of this piece of property and now have control of this one? That's a custom. That's something that people have to agree on, rather than simply saying that that's natural. I mean, we say we come to an agreement when you put your signature on a piece of paper. You sign a contract, and that's how you make an agreement. But that's not natural. That's something that we have come to an agreement on.